You've transcended your ego. So why does intimacy still terrify you? Most seekers master meditation but fail at marriage. Here's why. What if enlightenment is sabotaging your love life? Spiritual people face a cruel paradox. The closer you get to yourself, the further you drift from others. Can you truly awaken and still desire another human being? Or does awakening kill romantic love? 3 questions decide your fate. Are you using consciousness to hide? Is your partner real to you? Can the infinite tolerate monogamy? Most won't answer honestly. That's the problem. There's a particular kind of loneliness that only the spiritually awake understand. It's not the loneliness of the abandoned or the rejected. It's the loneliness of the person who has seen through the game, who has touched something vast and formless, who has dissolved the boundaries of self only to discover that this dissolution has made them somehow untouchable. You sit across from someone at dinner and they're telling you about their day, their worries, their plans, and you're nodding, you're present. But there's a part of you that's watching from somewhere else. A part that knows all of this is a dance of shadows. And that knowing, that precious awareness you've worked so hard to cultivate, has become a wall between you and everyone you might love. This is the trap nobody tells you about when you start the spiritual path. They tell you about liberation and freedom and peace. They don't tell you about the evening you'll spend alone in your apartment, surrounded by books about non-duality and enlightenment, wondering why every relationship you enter feels like a betrayal of what you've become. They don't warn you that the very consciousness you've awakened might be the thing that keeps you from ever truly merging with another human being. The awakening trap is simple and devastating. You've spent years learning to observe your thoughts rather than identify with them. You've practiced witnessing your emotions without being swept away. You've cultivated a kind of spacious awareness that can hold joy and sorrow with equal equilibrium. And then you try to fall in love, and you realize you've become too spacious. The person in front of you wants passion, and they want drama, and they want you to be swept away. But you're always watching, always witnessing, always maintaining that little gap of awareness that keeps you safe and separate and alone. Consider the spiritual practitioner who sits in meditation every morning for 2 hours. She's dissolved her sense of separate self dozens of times. She's touched the infinite. She knows in her bones that all boundaries are illusions. And then she goes on a date and the man across from her is talking about his startup and his podcast and his opinions about politics. And she feels nothing but a kind of distant compassion, not attraction, not curiosity, just a benevolent witnessing. She smiles and nods and asks appropriate questions. But inside she's thinking about how all of this is just ego, just identification, just the small self grasping for significance. She goes home alone again and tells herself it's because she hasn't met anyone on her level. But the truth she won't admit is that she's using her level to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of actually wanting someone. The ego-death paradox is even more vicious. You've done the work. You've seen that the self is a construction, a story, a habit of thought. You've experienced states where there is no you, just pure experiencing. And this is supposed to be liberation. But here's what the teachers don't tell you. Desire requires 2. Attraction requires separation. Love, at least the kind that shows up in a relationship, needs someone to love and someone to be loved. When you've truly dissolved the boundaries of self, when you've genuinely experienced that you and the other are one undivided consciousness, something strange happens to desire. It doesn't disappear exactly, but it loses its charge. It becomes abstract. How can you long for union when you've already experienced that you were never separate? Picture this. You're lying in bed with someone you've been seeing for 3 months. They're asleep beside you, their breath soft and steady, their hand resting on your chest. This should be intimate. This should feel like connection. But you're lying there experiencing yourself as the awareness in which all of this is occurring. The body breathing, the hand resting, the thought arising that this should feel more meaningful. You're not choosing to witness. It's just happening. The watcher has become automatic. And in that watching, there's a subtle distance. The person beside you is an experience arising in consciousness, not separate from you, but also not quite real in the way they need to be real for love to work. They're a dream character in the dream you've woken up inside of. And how do you love a dream character without lying to yourself about what's real? The spiritual path teaches you to be comfortable with paradox, but this one might break you. You need boundaries to have a self that can love. But you've spent years dissolving boundaries. You need desire to fuel relationship. But you've trained yourself to observe desire without grasping. You need the other to be real and separate and significant. But you've realized that separation is the root illusion. So you're stuck, too awake to pretend. Not awake enough to transcend the need for love entirely. Caught in the middle space where you're too conscious to lose yourself but too human to be satisfied with solitude. Let me tell you what happened to Michael. He'd been on the spiritual path for 15 years. Vipassana retreats, shamanic journeys, therapy, shadow work, the whole map. He'd had genuine awakening experiences, moments where the self dissolved completely and there was just this incredible openness, this sense of being the space in which everything occurred. He was doing well. He had a meditation practice that kept him stable. He had friends in the community. But he hadn't had a relationship in 7 years. 7 years of casual dates that went nowhere, of connections that fizzled, of feeling like he was speaking a different language than everyone around him. Then he met Sarah at a workshop. She was smart, funny, attractive. She'd done her own work. They started spending time together, and for the first few weeks it felt promising. They had conversations that went deep. They could talk about consciousness and presence and the nature of reality. But then something shifted. They were hiking together and Sarah turned to him and said, "I feel like you're not really here with me, like you're watching us from somewhere else." And Michael froze because she was right. He'd been having this experience of walking and talking and enjoying the scenery. But there was this observer in him, this witness consciousness that was always standing back, always evaluating, always maintaining that gap. He tried to explain, "I'm here. I'm just present to the present. I'm not lost in thought." But Sarah shook her head. "That's not the same as being present with me. You're present with the moment. But I need you to be present with me, not as an experience you're having." As a person, they broke up 2 weeks later. Michael spent months trying to understand what had happened. He meditated on it. He journaled about it. He talked to his teachers. And slowly he began to see the trap he'd built for himself. He'd become so identified with the witness, with pure awareness, that he'd lost the ability to be a person who could be affected by another person. He was always the space in which experience occurred, never the one having the experience. And that made him safe. It made him stable. But it also made him impossible to love, because love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires being a self that can be hurt. And he'd transcended that self. Or so he thought. What he'd actually done was hide so deeply in the witness position that no one could reach him anymore. This is the projection collapse that happens when you stop creating stories about your partner. In normal consciousness, when you meet someone, you immediately start projecting onto them. You see their smile and you imagine what kind of person smiles that way. You hear them talk about their childhood and you construct a narrative about who they are. You take the limited data you have and you fill in the gaps with fantasy and hope and desire. And this projection, this story you create about who they are, is what you fall in love with. Not the actual person, but the character you've invented based on the fragments you've observed. But when you've done deep spiritual work, when you've learned to see through the stories your mind creates, something shifts. You look at your partner, and instead of seeing the narrative, you see the construction. You see the way your mind is selecting certain data and ignoring other data to create a coherent story. You see the projection happening in real time. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The enchantment breaks. The person in front of you becomes just a collection of behaviors and statements and physical characteristics, not the character you were falling in love with. And without that character, without that story, what is there to love? This is why so many awake people describe their relationships as feeling flat. It's not that their partners are boring. It's that they can no longer participate in the mutual hallucination that makes romance work. They see too clearly. They're present to what is actually happening rather than the story about what's happening. And what is actually happening is often quite mundane. Two bodies sitting on a couch, words being spoken, thoughts arising and passing. No grand drama, no destined connection. Just this moment and then this moment and then this moment, which can be peaceful and even pleasant. The authenticity curse is subtler and more painful. You've learned to be honest, ruthlessly honest. You say what you mean and you mean what you say. You've stopped playing the social games that most people play. You don't pretend to be more interested than you are. You don't fake enthusiasm. You don't perform emotions you're not feeling. And this feels like integrity. It feels like you're finally being real after a lifetime of wearing masks. But here's what you didn't anticipate. Attraction requires a certain amount of mystery. Desire needs tension. Romance depends on not saying everything you think and feel in every moment. When you're brutally authentic, when you express every doubt and every fear and every moment of disconnection as it arises, you kill the electricity. The other person doesn't feel like they're discovering you. They feel like they're being given a detailed inventory of your psychological states. There's no pursuit. There's no wondering. There's just this constant stream of transparent self-reporting that sounds like consciousness, but functions as intimacy prevention. You tell yourself you're being vulnerable, but what you're actually doing is controlling the narrative. By naming everything as it happens, you stay in charge. You never lose yourself. You never let the other person have the power to affect you without your awareness. And that's not vulnerability. That's armor disguised as openness. Real vulnerability would be letting yourself want someone without immediately processing that want. It would be feeling attraction without analyzing where it comes from. It would be saying less, not more. It would be allowing yourself to be seen without constantly narrating your own seeing. But you've convinced yourself that this kind of restraint is dishonesty, that any filter between your inner experience and your expression is a betrayal of your authentic self. And so you bleed all over people in the name of truth and then wonder why they pull away. There was a woman named Jennifer who'd spent a decade in therapy and spiritual practice learning to express her feelings. She'd come from a family where emotions were suppressed, where you smiled and pretended everything was fine even when it wasn't. She'd done incredible work to break that pattern. She'd learned to name her anger and her sadness and her fear. And she was proud of this. It felt like health. But then she started dating someone and she found herself saying things like, "I notice I'm feeling some resistance to physical intimacy right now. Probably because my last relationship ended painfully and I'm protecting myself. Or I'm aware that I'm creating a narrative about you being emotionally unavailable based on limited data, but I thought I should share it anyway. Or I'm experiencing some attraction, but I'm also noticing fear of abandonment coming up. So I'm not sure how much of this is real." And the person she was dating, a kind and patient man who genuinely liked her, eventually said, "I feel like I'm dating your therapist, not you. Like you're always reporting on yourself from the outside. I don't need your analysis. I just need you to be here and let something happen between us." Jennifer was hurt and confused. She was being vulnerable. She was being honest. How could that be wrong? But what she couldn't see was that her constant self-narration was a way of never surrendering to the experience. She was always the one interpreting it, always maintaining control. She never let herself be swept away because being swept away meant losing the observer position. And the observer position was the only place she felt safe. The truth is that skillful intimacy requires some concealment. Not lying, not pretending, but a kind of selective revealing that creates space for desire to build. It's the difference between being naked and being exposed. Nakedness can be beautiful and intimate, but exposure, the kind where you're constantly turning yourself inside out and displaying every thought and feeling, is aggressive. It overwhelms. It doesn't invite the other person into discovery. It forces them into the role of witness to your endless self-examination. And that's not a role that generates desire. It generates compassion at best, exhaustion at worst. So you have to ask yourself, what am I actually doing when I'm being this honest? Am I creating intimacy or am I preventing it? Am I being vulnerable or am I staying in control by narrating my vulnerability? Can I allow myself to be less transparent, to hold some things back, to let the other person wonder about me, without feeling like I'm betraying my authentic self? Because if you can't, you're going to keep having relationships that feel like extended therapy sessions. Honest, clear, conscious, and utterly devoid of erotic charge. Now let's talk about what's really happening beneath all of this. The attachment wounds you think you've transcended through spiritual practice. You've done plant medicine and meditation and somatic work, and you've processed your childhood trauma and you think you're free. But needs don't vanish when you become conscious of them. They just get more sophisticated in how they hide. The spiritual path doesn't heal attachment injuries. It often just gives them new clothes. The anxious attachment becomes spiritual seeking. The avoidant attachment becomes non-attachment. The disorganized attachment becomes the person who oscillates between total merger and absolute solitude, calling it the dance of emptiness and form. You have to get really honest about this. What are you protecting by staying awake? What does the witness position allow you to avoid feeling? For most people, the answer is abandonment, the terror of being left, the wound of not being enough. When you identify as pure awareness, when you experience yourself as the unchanging space in which all experience occurs, you create a kind of invulnerability. Nothing can really hurt you because you're not really there. You're the space, not the content. And this feels like liberation. But it's often just a very sophisticated defense mechanism. You've learned to dissociate in a way that spiritual communities reward and celebrate. The person with anxious attachment who becomes a spiritual seeker doesn't heal their need for connection. They just redirect it. Instead of needing a partner, they need a guru. Instead of needing to be loved, they need to be seen as conscious. Instead of texting their ex at midnight, they're attending every retreat and workshop and ceremony, trying to fill the hole with spiritual experiences. And when they do enter relationship, they bring that same anxious energy, but now it's dressed up as devotion or twin flame rhetoric or soul connection. It's the same wound, just speaking a different language. The person with avoidant attachment who finds spirituality has hit the jackpot. Here's a whole philosophy that says attachment is suffering, that needing others is ignorance, that the highest state is one of complete self-sufficiency and equanimity. They can now frame their emotional unavailability as wisdom. They're not afraid of intimacy. They're just enlightened. They're not running from connection. They're just resting in their true nature, which doesn't need anything from anyone. And everyone in the spiritual community nods and agrees and maybe even envies their level of realization. Nobody sees that beneath the Buddha-like calm is the same terrified child who learned early on that needing someone means getting hurt. Think about your longest intimate relationship. Now think about the moment it ended, or the moment you knew it would end. What was the feeling beneath the feeling? Not the story you told yourself about incompatibility or timing or different paths. The actual sensation in your body. For most people, if they're really honest, it's either the panic of abandonment or the claustrophobia of engulfment. The fear of being left or the fear of being trapped. And all the spiritual work in the world doesn't touch these core wounds unless you specifically address them as wounds. If you approach them as illusions to be seen through, they just burrow deeper and run your life from the shadows. So what would actual healing look like? Not transcendence, not witnessing, not reframing, but genuine healing of the attachment system. It would mean feeling the terror of abandonment without spiritually bypassing it with insights about impermanence. It would mean sitting with the need for connection without immediately deconstructing it as ego. It would mean acknowledging that you have a nervous system that was shaped by early relationships, and that nervous system doesn't care about your enlightenment experiences. It still fires in the old patterns. It still creates the same reaching or retreating. And until you meet those patterns with real compassion, until you let yourself grieve what you didn't get as a child, the spiritual insights will just be a beautiful philosophy laid over an untouched wound. The merge fantasy is where spiritual concepts become genuinely dangerous in relationship. You've heard about oneness. You've maybe experienced it. The dissolution of boundaries where self and other and world all reveal themselves to be one undivided happening. And it's extraordinary. It's the deepest thing you can touch. But then you take that experience into relationship and you start confusing unity consciousness with codependence. You tell yourself that losing your boundaries with your partner is enlightened merger, that having no sense of where you end and they begin is divine union, that sacrificing your needs for theirs is ego death. And suddenly you're in a completely enmeshed, unhealthy dynamic that you've spiritualized into something sacred. This happens all the time. Two people meet at a retreat or a ceremony. They have an experience of connection that feels profound. They look into each other's eyes and see God, or real unity consciousness doesn't destroy healthy boundaries. It includes them. It sees that form and emptiness are not in conflict, that you can experience the deep truth of non-separation while still maintaining a functional sense of self that can navigate relationships skillfully. The ocean and the wave are not separate. But the wave still has its own shape, its own movement, its own integrity. When you collapse that distinction, when you say there is no wave, only ocean, you've gone too far into the absolute. You're using emptiness to avoid the complexity of form. The test is simple. Can you be alone without your partner and feel complete? Can they have experiences that don't include you without you feeling threatened? Can you disagree without it feeling like a rupture in consciousness itself? Can you hold your own needs as valid even when they conflict with theirs? If the answer to any of these is no, you're not experiencing divine union. You're experiencing enmeshment with spiritual branding. And that's not freedom. That's just a more sophisticated cage. Here's the thing nobody wants to acknowledge. The sacred loneliness of the awake is real. When you've seen through the conventional structures of meaning, when you've touched something vast and empty and free, you become a kind of exile. You can't go back to the normal world where people are completely identified with their stories, where they believe their thoughts are real and their fears are justified and their dramas are significant. You see it all as dream stuff, as consciousness playing with itself. And this seeing makes you lonely in a way that's hard to describe. Not lonely for company, lonely for someone who knows what you know. Someone who's been where you've been. someone who can meet you in the space beyond words. And this loneliness is often mistaken for spiritual superiority. You tell yourself you're just more evolved, that other people haven't woken up yet, that you're waiting for someone on your level. But underneath that story is just pain. The pain of being seen, the pain of being understood, the pain of feeling like you're speaking a language that nobody else recognizes. You go to parties and people are talking about their jobs and their vacation plans and the show they're watching, and you're nodding and smiling, but inside you're screaming because none of it feels real, because you've touched something that makes all of that seem like distraction, and you don't know how to bridge the gap between where you are and where everyone else is. But here's what you need to understand. This loneliness is not a badge of honor. It's not proof that you're special or advanced or chosen. It's just a stage, a difficult, painful stage that requires navigation. And the way through it is not to double down on your differentness. It's not to further isolate yourself in spiritual communities where everyone is performing their awakening and nobody is admitting they're lonely. The way through is to recognize that your loneliness might be as much about your fear of ordinariness as it is about your extraordinary realization. What if you could be awake and still engage with the conventional world without feeling like it's beneath you? What if you could see through the stories and still participate in them with kindness and humor? What if your realization didn't require everyone around you to also be realized? This is the real test of awakening, not how high you can fly into the absolute, but whether you can come back down and be with people where they are without judgment, without superiority, without the secret belief that you're more conscious than they are. Because that belief, that subtle sense of being different or special or further along, is the real barrier to love, not your awakening. Your attachment to your awakening. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a breath. Feel the weight of your body, the temperature of the air, the sounds around you. Now imagine yourself 5 years from now. 2 versions of yourself. In the first version, you've continued on this path exactly as you are. You've deepened your practice. You've had more insights. You've become even more conscious. But you're alone, still waiting for someone who can meet you where you are. Still confident that your loneliness is just because you haven't found the right person. Still believing that your awakening is why relationship hasn't worked. See that version of yourself. Really see them. The peace they've cultivated, the isolation they've accepted, the quiet way they've given up on being met. Now imagine the second version. In this one, something shifted. You realized that your consciousness was being used as protection. You saw the ways you were hiding in awareness. You admitted that you wanted love, messily and humanly, and without guarantees. You let yourself be foolish, and you let yourself want, and you let yourself be wrong about who you thought you needed. And you found something, not perfect, not a twin flame or a soulmate or someone who matches your spiritual resume, just a person, a real flawed, ordinary person who sees you and stays anyway, who doesn't need you to be conscious all the time, who meets you in your humanity, not just your divinity. See that version of yourself. See their face. See the specific ways they're different from who you are now. Now notice, which version feels more free? Really feel into it. Don't answer with your spiritual concepts. Feel with your body. Which version has less armor? Which version is more alive? Stay with this for a moment. Let the images fade, but keep the feeling. Keep the question. The practice of desire without grasping is the impossible art at the center of spiritual romance. How do you want someone fully? Let yourself care about them deeply, open your heart completely, and simultaneously release all attachment to outcome. How do you avoid the trap of neediness without falling into the trap of detachment? This is the koan that breaks most people, because the moment you care, your nervous system activates. Your attachment system comes online. The old patterns start firing. And then you're either gripping or running, and all your spiritual practice flies out the window. The key is not to want less. That's the path of suppression, and it leads nowhere good. The key is to want with your whole being while staying rooted in something larger than the want. It's like holding a bird in your hand. Too tight and you crush it. Too loose and it flies away. You have to find the exact pressure that allows the bird to rest in your palm while remaining free to leave. And that pressure is not a technique. It's a state of being that comes from genuinely knowing, not just believing, that your well-being does not depend on any particular outcome. This is where all the meditation and spiritual practice should pay off. Not in making you want less, but in giving you a foundation stable enough that you can want freely. You can let yourself fall in love without the terror that you'll be destroyed if it ends. You can open your heart knowing that even if it breaks, you'll survive. You can desire union without needing to possess. You can prefer one person without making them the source of your happiness. This is maturity, not transcendence, not detachment. just the hard-won capacity to hold intensity without being consumed by it. But most spiritually awake people skip this step. They go straight from suppressing their needs to pretending they don't have any. They use their realization of emptiness to avoid the complexity of actually wanting something. They say things like, "I'm complete in myself," or "I don't need anyone," or "if it happens, it happens," and they think this is freedom. But listen to the energy behind those words. Is it really peaceful, or is it defended? Is it genuine equanimity, or is it resignation? Are you free from need, or have you just gone numb to it? The practice is this. Let yourself want. Notice what you want in relationship, not what you think you should want based on your spiritual ideals. What you actually want. Do you want passion? Do you want stability? Do you want adventure? Do you want comfort? Do you want to be seen? Do you want to be left alone? Do you want intellectual connection? Do you want physical intensity? Get specific. Write it down. Own it. This is not manifestation work. This is honesty. And once you're honest about what you want, you practice holding that want without demanding that reality provide it. You practice the difference between desire and attachment. Desire is, "I want this." Attachment is, "I can't be okay unless I get this." See the difference? One is alive and human. The other is contracted and suffering. The more you practice this, the more you realize that desire itself is not the problem. Desire is energy. It's life force. It's what makes you get out of bed and create and connect and grow. The problem is when desire becomes contaminated with fear, when want becomes need, when preference becomes demand. And the only way to purify desire is not to kill it, but to feel it fully while remaining connected to the ground of being that exists whether or not the desire is fulfilled. This is the integration. Not spiritual people who don't want, but spiritual people who want freely, love fully, and remain unshaken by outcomes. Now we have to talk about something uncomfortable. The shadow of superiority. The way your awakening has made you feel secretly better than people who haven't woken up. You don't say this out loud. You might not even admit it to yourself, but it's there. In the subtle impatience you feel when someone is complaining about their problems. In the silent judgment when someone is lost in their drama. In the way you can't quite respect people who are still fully identified with their minds. And this superiority, this sense of being more conscious, is one of the primary reasons you can't find love. Because here's the thing. The brutal truth is this. Your standards for consciousness in a partner are often just a mechanism to protect yourself from vulnerability. If you can disqualify everyone as not awake enough, you never have to risk being hurt. You never have to face the terror of actually letting someone in. You stay safe in your superiority, convinced that you're alone because you're special, when really you're alone because you're afraid. And here's the even more brutal part. The qualities you judge in others are usually the disowned parts of yourself. You judge the person who's anxious because you've spiritual bypassed your own anxiety by calling it ego. You judge the person who's ambitious because you've suppressed your own desires for achievement by calling them worldly. You judge the person who needs reassurance because you've cut yourself off from your own needs by calling them attachment. So when you're dismissing people as unconscious, what you're really doing is rejecting the parts of yourself that your spiritual practice hasn't integrated. You're projecting your shadow onto them and calling it discernment. The work here is painful. It requires admitting that you've been using your awakening as armor, that the person you need to be with might not look like what you expected. That consciousness comes in many forms, and maybe the person who seems ordinary or even unconscious by your standards might have a depth of heart that your spiritual sophistication has protected you from. It requires considering that the very qualities you've transcended might be exactly what you need in a partner to balance you, to ground you, to call you back into your humanity when you floated too far into the absolute. Who can you actually respect enough to love? Not tolerate, not teach, not rescue, but meet as an equal. If the answer is no one, that's not a statement about the world's level of consciousness. That's a statement about the walls you've built around your heart. Let's talk about embodiment. You've spent years in your head and in your practice cultivating witness consciousness, pure awareness, the space of knowing, and you're good at it. You can drop into presence. You can observe your thoughts. You can rest as awareness itself. But somewhere along the way you left your body behind. Not completely. You haven't abandoned it. But you've made it an object. Something you observe rather than something you are. And this creates a massive problem in intimate relationship because intimacy, real intimacy, requires being embodied. Being in the body, not above it watching it. Think about physical intimacy, sex, touch, the erotic. These require full presence and sensation. They require letting yourself be a body that feels and wants and responds. But you've trained yourself to be the witness of sensation, not the one having it. So when you're with someone, when clothes start coming off and hands start moving, you're not fully there. Part of you is watching, observing the arousal, noting the sensation, analyzing whether you're really present or just going through the motions. And your partner can feel it. They can feel that you're not entirely with them, that some part of you is hovering above the experience rather than surrendering to it. This is the embodiment deficit. You've become so good at being consciousness that you've forgotten how to be a body. And you can't have great sex as consciousness. You can't have passion and hunger and raw desire from the witness position. Those qualities require that you temporarily abandon the watcher and let yourself be consumed by sensation. They require that you lose yourself, at least for moments, in the body's wisdom. And for someone who's built their identity around never losing themselves, this is terrifying. The practice of embodiment is deceptively simple but genuinely difficult. It's about dropping attention out of the head and into sensation, not observing sensation, being sensation. This means sitting with physical feelings without immediately naming them or analyzing them. It means movement without a spiritual goal, dance for the sake of moving, not to release energy or raise consciousness. Eating food and actually tasting it instead of noting that you're tasting it. Touching your own skin and feeling it rather than watching yourself feel it. These are basic things, but if you've been on the spiritual path for a while, they're probably harder than you think. And when it comes to sexuality and intimacy, this is everything. Can you kiss someone without the observer? Can you let your body respond without monitoring whether the response is appropriate or spiritual or conscious? Can you feel pleasure without turning it into an experience you're having? Can you be hungry for another body without spiritualizing that hunger into something about energy or tantra or divine union? Just raw human animal desire. Just the simple beauty of two bodies giving each other pleasure. No higher meaning, no sacred purpose. Just this. For many spiritual people, this feels like a regression. Like they've worked so hard to transcend the merely physical, and now they're being asked to go back. But that's the wrong framework. It's not transcendence and then regression. It's transcendence and then integration. You go up into the absolute and you see that everything is consciousness, and then you come back down and you realize that consciousness is everything, including your body, including desire, including the sweat and mess and hunger of physical intimacy. The goal is not to live in either realm. It's to be able to move fluidly between them, to be the spacious awareness when that's what's called for, and to be the embodied animal when that's what's called for, and to know that both are true, neither is more spiritual than the other. So the question is, can you be a body and not just have one? Can you let yourself be reduced to pure sensation? Can you forget about being conscious long enough to just enjoy being alive in a physical form? Because if you can't, you're going to keep having relationships that are mentally connected and spiritually aligned, but physically dead. And that's only half of what's available to you. The vulnerability paradox is where all of this comes together in the most painful way. You think you're vulnerable because you share your insights. You talk about your awakening experiences. You're honest about your spiritual struggles. You're open about your practice. But none of that is actually vulnerable. That's just transparent. Vulnerability is not showing people your strength. It's showing them your weakness. It's not sharing what you've transcended. It's admitting what still hurts. It's not talking about your consciousness. It's revealing your need. Real vulnerability would be saying, I'm lonely, and I don't know if this spiritual path has made it better or worse. It would be admitting, I'm scared that if I let you in, you'll leave, and I don't know if I can survive that again. It would be confessing, I have needs and I've spent years calling them ego, but they're still here, and I don't know what to do with them. That's vulnerable, because that's where you can be hurt. That's where you're not in control. That's where you're asking someone to meet you in your raw humanity, not your refined consciousness. But instead, you've built spiritual armor. You've taken all the concepts and practices and insights and you've woven them into a protective shell. When someone gets close, you talk about non-attachment. When someone wants more from you, you reference the illusion of the separate self. When someone expresses hurt, you gently remind them that pain is resistance to what is. You sound so wise, so conscious, so awake. But what you're actually doing is using spirituality to keep people at a distance. You're using enlightenment as a defense mechanism. And the tragedy is that you don't even know you're doing it. This is the most sophisticated form of avoidance there is. Because it's not obvious. It doesn't look like walls. It looks like openness. It sounds like truth. But it functions as protection. and the people you're with can feel it even if they can't name it. They feel like they can see all of you except the parts that matter. They feel like they're in relationship with your wisdom, but not your wound. And wisdom alone is not enough. Wisdom without wound is just philosophy. It's not intimate. It's not real. It's not love. The practice here is to notice when you're reaching for spiritual concepts in moments of emotional intensity. When someone is upset with you and you start talking about projections or triggers or the nature of suffering, stop. Feel what's underneath. Probably fear. Probably shame. Probably the vulnerability of being seen as flawed or wrong or not as conscious as you present yourself to be. And instead of spiritualizing it, just be with it. Let yourself be the one who's scared. Let yourself be the one who doesn't have the answer. Let yourself be the one who needs something from another person and can't pretend you don't. This is terrifying, because your whole identity has been built on being the aware one, the conscious one, the one who's done the work, and now you're being asked to be the messy one, the needy one, the one who's still figuring it out. But this is what intimacy requires. Not your best self, your real self, not your highest consciousness, your full humanity, including the parts that aren't yet enlightened, including the parts that might never be enlightened because they're just basic human needs that don't get transcended. What would true vulnerability cost you? Really ask that. What would you have to give up? Probably the identity as someone who's figured it out. Probably the sense of safety that comes from staying in the observer position. Probably the secret belief that you're more evolved than the people around you. And those things feel important. They feel like they're protecting. Now we come to the integration, the synthesis of everything we've explored. You cannot choose between awakening and being loved because they were never opposites. The belief that they are is the root problem. The belief that consciousness and connection are in conflict, that you're either identified with ego and available for relationship, or you're awake and alone. But this is a false choice based on incomplete realization. True awakening doesn't separate you from relationship. It transforms how you show up in relationship. It doesn't eliminate desire. It purifies it. It doesn't make you invulnerable. It gives you the capacity to be vulnerable without being destroyed. The integration looks like this. You maintain your practice. You stay connected to the spacious awareness that is your true nature. You continue to see through the stories and the dramas and the identification with thought, but you also fully inhabit your humanity. You let yourself want. You let yourself need. You let yourself be affected by another person. You allow your heart to break and you trust it will open wider. You stop using consciousness as an excuse for emotional unavailability. You stop hiding in awareness when things get messy. You show up, fully, as someone who knows they are the infinite and who is willing to play in the finite with complete commitment. This requires building a relational practice that honors both dimensions. On one side, you have your meditation, your inquiry, your direct exploration of consciousness. You need this. It keeps you grounded in what's real. It prevents you from getting completely lost in relationship drama. It reminds you that your essence is untouched by anything that happens in the world of form. But on the other side, you have your human practices. The way you communicate, the way you handle conflict, the way you express needs, the way you create and maintain boundaries, the way you show up for another person day after day, even when it's not spiritual or exciting or meaningful, just showing up because you said you would. These two sides of practice are not in conflict. The spiritual dimension gives you the foundation. The relational dimension gives you the form. Without the foundation, you're lost in neediness and drama and fear. But without the form, you're just having spiritual experiences in isolation. You're conscious, but you're not connected. And humans are relational beings. Even the most awakened humans need intimacy, companionship, the simple pleasure of being seen and held by another person who cares whether you exist. So what does this integrated approach actually look like in practice? It means you meditate every morning, but you also learn how to fight fairly with your partner. It means you inquire into the nature of self, but you also attend to your attachment style and work with it consciously. It means you have profound insights about emptiness, but you also remember to ask your partner about their day and actually listen to the answer. It means you can rest as pure awareness, but you can also get your hands dirty with the mess of human relationship without feeling like it's beneath you. It means you stop waiting for the perfect conscious partner who will meet you in the absolute and never trigger you, because that person doesn't exist. And if they did, the relationship would probably be boring. You need someone who will challenge you, who will call you on your spiritual armor, who will demand that you show up as more than just awareness. You need someone who will love your humanity, not just admire your consciousness. And you need to be willing to be that person for someone else. To meet them where they are, not where your spiritual ego thinks they should be. The integrated person can hold paradox. They can be attached and non-attached simultaneously. They can care deeply about their relationship while knowing it's ultimately empty. They can work on communication and boundaries while seeing that there's no separate self to communicate or bound. They can feel jealousy or insecurity, and instead of spiritually bypassing it, they work with it at the human level while simultaneously seeing it from the absolute perspective. This is not confusion. This is not compartmentalization. This is genuine integration. The ability to hold multiple levels of truth at the same time without collapsing one into the other. And here's what this makes possible. Relationships that actually work. Not perfect. Not without conflict or difficulty or growth edges. But relationships where two people can be real with each other. Where consciousness serves connection rather than preventing it. Where awakening becomes something you share rather than something that isolates you. Where your spiritual realization enhances your capacity for love rather than diminishing it. This is what you're actually longing for. Not a transcendence of relationship, but a relationship that includes transcendence. Not an escape from human messiness into spiritual purity, but a spirituality that can hold all of the human mess without being threatened by it. Not becoming less so you can avoid being hurt, but becoming more, expanding your capacity to hold both the infinite and the intimate, the absolute and the personal, the eternal and the everyday. But to get there, you have to let go of the ways you've been using your awakening to stay safe. You have to admit that you're hiding, that you're scared, that you've built beautiful spiritual concepts around your basic human fear of being abandoned or rejected or hurt, and you have to be willing to risk it anyway. To step into relationship with your eyes open, knowing you might get hurt, trusting that you're finally solid enough to survive it, that your realization is real enough that it won't shatter when tested by actual intimacy. This is the real spiritual practice. Not the one you do on the cushion, the one you do in relationship, the one where you have to integrate everything you've learned about consciousness with the basic skills of being a decent partner, where you have to balance surrender and boundaries, where you have to hold your own experience and someone else's simultaneously, where you have to be awake and be in love and not let either one cancel out the other. And if you can do this, if you can bring your full consciousness into relationship without using it as armor, something shifts. The loneliness dissolves. Not because you've found the perfect partner, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself through your spirituality. You've stopped using awakening as an excuse to avoid intimacy. You've stopped pretending that transcendence means you don't need anyone. And in that honesty, in that willingness to be both infinite and intimate, you finally become available for the kind of love you've been seeking all along. The spiritually awake don't have to struggle with love. They struggle when they haven't fully integrated their awakening with their humanity. When they're using one to avoid the other, when they think consciousness and connection are opposed, but they're not. They're two faces of the same thing. And when you finally see that, when you finally embody that, relationship stops being a threat to your realization and becomes an expression of it, the form that emptiness takes, the way consciousness knows itself through intimacy, the human face of the absolute. This is what you're being called to now. Not to choose between being awake and being loved, but to be awake enough to love without protection, conscious enough to be vulnerable without being destroyed, empty enough to be filled by another human being, and solid enough in your realization that nothing that happens in relationship can touch what you really are. So here's your final practice, your integration blueprint. First, acknowledge what you actually want in relationship, not what you think you should want, what you really want. Write it down, own it. Let yourself feel the desire without immediately transcending it. Second, identify where you're using spiritual concepts to avoid vulnerability, where you reach for non-attachment when you're actually just scared, where you talk about emptiness when you're really just protecting yourself. Be honest about this. Write these patterns down. See them clearly. Third, look at your attachment history, your actual relational patterns, not your spiritual narratives about them, but the raw data. How do you behave when you're scared? Do you reach or retreat? Do you demand or disappear? Work with this at the human level. Get therapy if you need it. Do attachment work. Don't spiritual bypass this with insights about the illusory self. Fourth, commit to a practice of embodiment. Every day, spend time dropping out of the witness and into sensation. Move, dance, feel, touch. Be physical without making it spiritual. Just inhabit your body like it's the only thing that exists. Fifth, practice desire without grasping. Let yourself want something fully. A relationship, a person, an outcome. Feel the want completely. and then practice putting it down. Not suppressing it, not transcending it, just releasing your grip while keeping your heart open. Do this daily until you can hold intensity without being consumed by it. Sixth, work with your superiority shadow. Every time you catch yourself judging someone as less conscious, stop. Turn it around. Ask yourself what quality in them you've disowned in yourself. What are they expressing that you've suppressed? Do this ruthlessly. Your superiority is your biggest barrier to love. Seventh, practice real vulnerability. With a trusted friend, with a therapist, with your journal, start admitting the things you never say. The needs you have, the fears you carry, the ways you're still wounded, the parts of you that aren't enlightened and might never be. Say these things out loud. Let them be real. Stop performing your consciousness. And finally, stay in the this is possible. It's not only possible, it's natural. The struggle you've been having isn't because awakening and love are opposed. It's because you haven't yet learned how to bring them together. But you can. And when you do, everything changes. The loneliness ends, not because you find someone, but because you stop being someone who can't be found. You stop hiding in consciousness. You stop using enlightenment as armor. You become genuinely available, genuinely open, genuinely willing to let another human being matter to you without making them responsible for your happiness. And from that place, love becomes possible. Not the fantasy version you were waiting for, not the twin flame who mirrors your consciousness back to you, but real love, messy, human, beautiful love, with someone who sees you and stays, who challenges you and grounds you, who loves your awareness and your anxiety, who meets you in the absolute and holds you in the ordinary, who doesn't need you to be conscious all the time, but just needs you to be there. This is what's waiting for you on the other side of this work. Not perfect relationship, but real relationship. Not spiritual performance, but genuine intimacy. Not more isolation in your awakened loneliness, but connection that includes and honors your consciousness without being limited by it. A love that can hold all of you, the infinite and the finite, the realized and the unfinished, the spacious awareness and the human heart that still breaks and still hopes and still wants to be held. You don't have to choose between awakening and being loved. That was always a false choice. The real choice is whether you're willing to bring your full awakening into the vulnerable messiness of human relationship. Whether you're ready to stop using consciousness as protection and start using it as a foundation for deeper connection. Whether you can be both eternal and intimate, both free and committed, both empty and full of love. And if you can, if you're willing to do this work, to face these shadows, to integrate these dimensions, then everything you've been seeking is possible. Not because you transcend your humanity, but because you finally, fully, courageously embrace it, with your awakening intact, with your consciousness expanded, but with your heart finally, beautifully, terrifyingly open to being seen and touched and changed by another human being who is just as infinite and just as fragile as you are. Let me tell you about David. He was 42 when he finally understood what had been happening. He'd spent 20 years on the path. Zen practice, insight meditation, breathwork, plant medicines, the whole journey. He'd had legitimate awakenings, moments of such profound clarity and openness that his entire sense of self had dissolved. He knew what it was to be pure awareness. He'd touched the absolute repeatedly, but he'd been single for 11 years. 11 years of occasional dates, brief connections, nothing that lasted. And he'd developed a story about it that made perfect sense within his spiritual framework. The story went like this. He was too conscious for most people. His nervous system was too sensitive. He needed someone who understood non-duality, who had done their own deep work, who could meet him in silence and presence. Most people were too caught up in their minds, their dramas, their identification with ego. He wasn't judging them. He had compassion, but he couldn't pretend to be less aware than he was just to make someone comfortable. So he waited. He attended retreats and workshops, hoping to meet someone there. He scrolled through dating apps looking for keywords like consciousness and awakening and presence. He had a very clear picture of what his partner would need to be like. Enlightened, or at least actively pursuing enlightenment, comfortable with silence, emotionally regulated, spiritually mature. Then one day he was at his brother's wedding. His brother was marrying someone David would have never considered. She was sweet but ordinary. She worked in marketing. She watched reality television. She talked about her feelings constantly. She hadn't read any of the books David considered essential. She'd never meditated a day in her life. And watching his brother with her, David felt something unexpected, envy. Not because she was attractive, though she was, but because of how his brother looked at her. The unguarded love in his face, the way he leaned into her when she spoke, the obvious deep intimacy between them. They had something David hadn't experienced in over a decade. And his brother wasn't spiritually advanced. His brother was a regular guy with a regular life who'd somehow figured out how to love and be loved. David went home that night and sat with the envy. Really sat with it. Didn't try to transcend it or understand it or make it mean something. Just felt it. And underneath the envy was grief. Oceans of grief. For all the years he'd been alone. For all the connection he'd missed while he was waiting for the right conscious partner. For the way he'd used his spiritual practice to protect himself from the vulnerability of actually wanting someone. The grief was so intense it felt like it would crack him open. And he let it. He cried for hours, not witnessing the crying, just being broken, and something shifted in that breaking. He realized that his standards for a partner weren't about consciousness at all. They were about control. If he could only love someone who was already enlightened, someone who was emotionally regulated, someone who never triggered him, then he'd never have to risk being hurt. He'd never have to face his own attachment wounds. He'd never have to be vulnerable in the way that real intimacy requires. His spiritual framework had become the most sophisticated defense mechanism possible, and he'd been living inside it for over a decade, convinced it was wisdom. So he changed the experiment. He stopped looking for someone conscious. He started looking for someone kind, someone who made him laugh, someone he actually enjoyed being around, regardless of whether they understood emptiness or non-duality or any of the concepts he'd been using as filters. And within 6 months he met Rachel. Rachel was a high school teacher. She practiced yoga but had no interest in enlightenment. She was emotionally expressive in ways that sometimes overwhelmed him. She got anxious about things he thought were trivial. She needed reassurance. She wanted to talk about the relationship constantly. By his old standards, she would have been completely wrong for him. But something else was happening. He was falling in love. Real love, not the spiritual concept of love. He wanted to see her. He thought about her when they were apart. Her texts made him smile. Her body against his made him forget about consciousness entirely. And yes, she triggered him. Her anxiety activated his old patterns of withdrawal. Her need for reassurance brought up his fear of being trapped. Her emotional intensity sometimes made him want to run back to his meditation cushion and never come out. But instead of running, he stayed. He felt the triggers. He worked with them. He went to therapy for the first time in his spiritual career and started addressing his attachment patterns at the human level, not the transcendent level. 2 years later, they're still together. It's not always easy. Rachel still doesn't understand half of what David experiences in his meditation practice. She sometimes rolls her eyes when he talks about non-duality. She gets frustrated when he goes too far into the witness position and stops being emotionally present. But she loves him, really loves him. Not his consciousness, him, the human being with fears and needs and a weird sense of humor and a tendency to overthink everything. And he loves her, her messiness and her emotional intensity, and the way she cries at commercials and needs to process everything out loud. He loves her humanity. And in loving her humanity, he's finally made peace with his own. David's story matters because it reveals the core lie that keeps spiritually awake people isolated, the lie that you need someone on your level, the lie that consciousness is a prerequisite for intimacy, the lie that your aloneness is noble rather than afraid. Most awake people are waiting for a partner who doesn't exist. They're waiting for someone who has done as much work as they have, who is as conscious as they are, who won't trigger them or challenge them or require them to be human in uncomfortable ways. And while they wait, life passes. Years pass. The capacity for intimate connection atrophies from disuse. And the loneliness becomes so normal they stop recognizing it as suffering. Here's another example. Maya was 38, a yoga teacher and energy healer. She'd had a series of intense but short relationships with men she met in spiritual communities. Each one started with incredible chemistry. They'd meet at a retreat or ceremony, have these deep conversations about consciousness, feel like they'd known each other forever. The sex was transcendent, full of eye-gazing and breathwork and the sense that they were merging souls. For weeks or months, it would feel like the most profound connection possible, and then it would fall apart, usually over something mundane. One person would need more time together than the other could give. Or someone would express a need in a way that felt too needy, or they'd have a conflict about something practical, and suddenly all the spiritual connection in the world couldn't help them navigate it. Maya's pattern was always the same. The moment things got difficult, the moment the spiritual honeymoon phase ended and the actual work of relationship began, she'd start to see problems. She'd notice her partner's unconscious patterns, the way they handled money without mindfulness, the way they got stressed about work, the way they watched television or ate meat or talked about their family, and she'd feel disappointed. This person had seemed so conscious, but look at these blind spots. Look at these areas where they're still asleep. And within a few weeks of that disappointment arising, the relationship would end, usually by mutual agreement, usually with beautiful conscious language about different paths and timing and honoring each other's journeys. But underneath the spiritual vocabulary, the same old pattern. Intimacy reaches a certain depth, triggers start arising, and she bails. It took a facilitator in a group process to finally call her out. Maya was sharing about her most recent breakup, using all the right spiritual language, talking about how they'd grown in different directions, how she needed someone more aligned with her path. And the facilitator stopped her, asked her a simple question. How many relationships have ended with almost that exact same story? Maya was quiet, thinking. 7 relationships in 12 years. All intense, all spiritual, all ending within 6 months, with the same narrative about misalignment. And the facilitator said, at what point do you consider that the pattern is you? That you're using spiritual language to avoid looking at your own avoidance? Maya was furious. She left the group. She spent days in that fury, convinced the facilitator didn't understand, didn't see her clearly, was projecting. But the anger had an edge of recognition to it. And eventually she let herself look underneath. What she found was her father. Her father who'd been emotionally volatile and unpredictable, who'd been warm and loving one moment and ragefully critical the next, who'd made her feel like she was walking on eggshells, never knowing what would set him off. She'd spent her whole childhood trying to manage his emotional states, trying to be good enough, conscious enough, perfect enough that he wouldn't explode, and she'd never processed that. She'd transcended it, or so she thought. She'd done plant medicine and seen her childhood from a place of compassion. She'd forgiven him. She'd seen the perfection in all of it. But she'd never actually felt the terror of being close to someone whose emotional state could change without warning, the terror of letting someone matter to you when they might hurt you. So her pattern made perfect sense. She'd find men who seemed spiritually advanced, emotionally regulated, safe, and things would be beautiful as long as they stayed in that spiritual container. But the moment they showed normal human messiness, the moment they got stressed or frustrated or needed something she wasn't ready to give, her nervous system would panic, not consciously. Consciously, she'd think about alignment and consciousness and different paths. But her body was screaming danger, and she was listening to it. She was bailing before she could be hurt the way her father had hurt her. And she was using spiritual concepts to make it seem like wisdom rather than wounding. The work she had to do was not more spiritual practice. It was trauma therapy, somatic work, actually feeling the fear that had been driving her pattern for years. Learning that conflict doesn't mean danger. That someone having a bad day doesn't mean they're going to rage at her. That people can be unconscious in some areas and still be safe to love. This work was harder than any meditation retreat she'd ever done. Because it required staying in relationship when every cell in her body was screaming to run. It required letting herself be triggered and not immediately ending things. It required trusting that she could survive someone's anger or disappointment without abandoning herself. And it took years. Literal years of working with a therapist, of staying in relationship past the point where she'd normally leave, of learning to regulate her nervous system instead of regulating her environment by only allowing in people who never challenged her. Maya is now in a relationship that's lasted 3 years. 3 years. Longer than all her previous relationships combined. And it's not with someone particularly spiritual. He's a carpenter. He's kind and solid and has no interest in enlightenment. He gets stressed about money. He watches sports. He's not always emotionally articulate. But he's consistent. He doesn't rage. He doesn't disappear. And when they fight, which they do, he doesn't leave. He stays and works through it. And that consistency has slowly reprogrammed Maya's nervous system. She's learned that she can be close to someone without constantly monitoring them for signs of danger. She's learned that consciousness is not the same as emotional safety. And she's learned that the spiritual bypassing she'd been doing for years was just sophisticated avoidance dressed up in beautiful language. These stories, David's and Maya's, are not exceptions. They're the norm. Almost every spiritually awake person who struggles with relationship is actually struggling with unaddressed attachment wounds that their spiritual practice has helped them manage but not heal. The practice gives them tools to regulate their nervous system, to observe their patterns, to create space around their triggers. But it doesn't heal the original wound. It just makes them more comfortable with the symptoms, and that comfort becomes a trap. Because if you're comfortable being alone, if you've developed a whole identity around being a conscious, solitary person, you never have to face the actual work of healing your capacity for intimacy. So, let's talk about the actual practice. Not spiritual practice. Relational practice. The day-to-day, unglamorous, difficult work of becoming someone who can sustain intimate relationship. This is not about finding the right person. This is about becoming the right person. Someone who can be both awake and available, both conscious and connected, both enlightened and emotionally present. And it starts with radical honesty about where you actually are. Day 1. Your only job is to write the truth. Get a journal or open a document and write down every relationship you've had that lasted more than 3 months. For each one, write down why it ended. Not the story you tell yourself or other people. The real reason, the one you don't like to admit. Were you bored? Were you scared? Did they get too close? Did they need too much? Did you meet someone else? Did you feel trapped? Did you sabotage it? Did you use your spiritual practice as an excuse to avoid working on issues? Write it all down. No judgment, no spiritual bypassing, just the raw truth of your pattern. And then look at what you wrote. Really look at it. What's the common thread? What's the thing that shows up in every ending? That's your work. That's what you're healing. Day 2. Identify your attachment style. If you don't know it, take an attachment style quiz online. Read about anxious, avoidant, and disorganized attachment. Be brutally honest about which one fits you. Most spiritual people are avoidant. They've learned to regulate their need for closeness by convincing themselves they don't need closeness. But some are anxiously attached and use spiritual seeking as a way to find something that will finally fill the void. And some oscillate between the two, which is disorganized. Once you know your style, read everything you can about it. Not spiritual material. Attachment theory, developmental psychology, neuroscience. Understand that this is not ego. This is nervous system wiring from your earliest relationships, and it runs your intimate life whether you're conscious or not. Your spiritual practice has not changed this. It's just given you better language to describe your patterns. Day 3. Make a list of everyone you're attracted to but have dismissed as not conscious enough. Really make this list. Include people from dating apps you swiped past. People you met at parties who seemed nice but not spiritual. People your friends tried to set you up with who didn't read the right books. For each person, write down specifically why you dismissed them. Now look at that list. How many of those reasons are actually about compatibility, and how many are about fear? How many are standards and how many are walls? Be honest. Are you protecting your consciousness, or are you protecting yourself from vulnerability? This exercise is painful because it reveals how much opportunity you've rejected in the name of being discerning. Day 4. Reach out to someone you've been dismissing. Not to date them, just to be open to them as a human being. Message someone you matched with but never responded to. Text an acquaintance you've been polite but distant with. Say yes to a social invitation you'd normally decline because the people aren't your spiritual tribe. The point is not to force yourself into relationship. The point is to practice being open. To notice what happens in your body when you consider connecting with someone who doesn't fit your criteria. To observe the ways you've been contracting. This is uncomfortable. You'll notice judgment. You'll notice superiority. You'll notice the part of you that wants to stay in your bubble. That's fine. Just notice it. Don't act on it. Practice being open even when your habitual patterns want you to close. Day 5. Sit with loneliness without transcending it. Set a timer for 20 minutes. Sit down somewhere quiet. Feel your loneliness. Not witness it. Not inquire into it. Not see it as an illusion. Feel it. Let it have a shape and a texture and a temperature. Let it be as big as it wants to be. You might cry. Day 6. Call someone you used to be close with but have drifted from. Not someone in your spiritual community. Someone from before. A friend from college or high school or your old job. Someone who knew you before you were on the path. Tell them you've been thinking about them and you miss them. Ask about their life. Really listen. Don't try to share your spiritual insights. Don't try to elevate the conversation to consciousness. Just be with them where they are. Talk about ordinary things. Laugh about old memories. Feel what it's like to connect without agenda. This is practice in meeting people where they are instead of requiring them to meet you where you are. And it's practice in remembering that you're more than your awakening. You're also the person who has history and relationships and a life that existed before you started meditating. Day 7. Rest. No practice today. Just notice what the last 6 days have stirred up. Notice what you're resisting. Notice what you're avoiding. Notice what you're learning. Write it down if you want. Or don't. Just be with whatever's alive in you. Integration takes time. The patterns you're working with have been running for decades. 6 days of practice isn't going to undo them, but it's a start. It's a different direction. It's choosing connection over isolation, choosing vulnerability over protection, choosing humanity over transcendence. And that choice, made daily, changes everything. Week 2 is about embodiment. Because you can't sustain intimacy if you're not in your body. And most spiritually awake people have abandoned their bodies in favor of pure awareness. They think this is advancement. It's actually dissociation with spiritual branding. So this week you're coming home to the body, not observing it, inhabiting it. Day 8. Move without mindfulness. Put on music you loved when you were younger. Something with a beat. Something that makes you want to move. And dance. Not spiritual dance. Not conscious movement. Just dance the way you did before you knew about presence. Let your body move how it wants to move. Don't make it sacred. Don't turn it into a practice. Just feel the joy of having a body that can move. Feel the music in your chest and your hips and your feet. Let yourself be silly. Let yourself be wild. Let yourself forget about the witness and just be movement happening. Do this for at least 20 minutes. Your mind will try to make it spiritual. Resist that. This is about reclaiming the body as something other than an object of awareness. Day 9. Eat something delicious slowly, not mindfully. That's different. Mindful eating keeps you in the observer position. This is about pleasure. Choose something you love, something rich or sweet or savory. Sit down with it. Turn off your phone and eat it slowly, letting yourself enjoy every bite. Let yourself make sounds if you want to. Let yourself have a sensory experience that's just about pleasure, not consciousness. This is training your nervous system to allow pleasure without immediately stepping back from it to watch yourself having it. Most awake people are so practiced at observing that they've forgotten how to just experience. This practice reminds you. Day 10. Take a cold shower or a hot bath, something with intense temperature. And instead of using it as spiritual practice, instead of watching your mind's reaction to discomfort or pleasure, just be in the sensation. Be cold, be hot, be the body feeling what it feels. Let your mind complain if it wants to. Let your body contract or relax or tense or soften. Don't narrate it. Don't witness it, just be it. This is probably the hardest thing I'm going to ask you to do, because it requires temporarily abandoning the observer position that you've worked so hard to cultivate. But intimate relationship requires this ability. The ability to be so fully in sensation that you forget you're being conscious. So practice it with temperature first, where the stakes are low. Day 11. Touch yourself without making it spiritual. This is about reclaiming sexuality as a bodily experience, rather than an energetic or consciousness-expanding one. Set aside time when you won't be interrupted. Touch your body the way you'd want a lover to touch you. Not tantric, not about moving energy, just pleasure. Let yourself feel desire without turning it into something transcendent. Let yourself enjoy physical sensation for its own sake. This is critical work because many spiritual people have disconnected their sexuality from their bodies. They've made it about chakras, or energy, or consciousness. And that disconnection makes actual physical intimacy with another person feel too mundane, too base, too unspiritual. You have to reclaim the body's wisdom around pleasure, the simple animal joy of sensation. Without that, intimate touch with a partner will always feel like it's missing something. Day 12. Spend time with children or animals if you can. If you have kids or pets, be with them. If not, volunteer somewhere or visit a friend who does. Watch how they're completely in their bodies, how they don't observe their play, how they're fully absorbed in sensation and movement and immediate experience. They're not conscious in the way you think about consciousness, but they're alive in a way you might have lost. Watch them. Learn from them. Notice how much you live in your head compared to how much they live in their bodies. This isn't about becoming childish. It's about remembering that aliveness and presence existed in you before you learned to witness everything. Day 13. Have a hard workout, something that pushes your body to its limits. Running, lifting, swimming, whatever you can access. And push until your mind has to shut up. Push until you're just breath and muscle and sweat. Push until there's no room for observation, just survival. This is embodiment without choice. Your body takes over when it has to work this hard. And that's good. That's what you're learning. That consciousness is wonderful, but so is being an animal that breathes and sweats and moves. Both are true. Both are you, and intimate relationship requires both. Day 14. Rest in your body. Lie down somewhere comfortable, and instead of resting as awareness, rest as a body. Feel the weight of your limbs. Feel your breath in your belly, not from above watching it, but as the breath itself. Feel your heartbeat from the inside. Scan through your body not as an observer, but as the body becoming aware of itself. This is subtle but crucial. It's the difference between being consciousness that has a body and being a body that's conscious. Practice the second one. That's the version that can kiss someone and forget about enlightenment. That's the version that can make love and not turn it into a spiritual experience. That's the version that can be intimate. Week 3 is where it gets real. This is the week you practice with actual people. No more solo work. Now you're taking what you've learned into relationship, even if it's not romantic relationship. You're practicing being open, being vulnerable, being human with others, and you're going to notice all your armor, all your ways of staying safe, all your spiritual concepts that keep people at a distance. Good. That's what we want to see so we can dismantle it. Day 15. Tell someone something you've never admitted. A friend, a therapist, anyone safe. But tell them something real, not a spiritual sharing about your awakening experiences. Something vulnerable, something that makes you feel exposed. Maybe it's that you're lonely. Maybe it's that you're scared you'll never find love. Maybe it's that you judge yourself for still wanting relationship after all this spiritual work. Maybe it's something darker, messier, more human than you usually reveal. And when you tell them, notice the urge to immediately qualify it with spiritual insight. Don't. Just let it sit there, naked and unprotected. Let yourself be seen in your need, your fear, your humanity. This is the vulnerability that creates intimacy, not sharing your insights. Sharing your wounds, day 16. Ask someone for help with something, not advice, actual help. Something practical. Help moving furniture, help figuring out your taxes, help with something you could probably do yourself but would be easier with support. This is practice in letting yourself need people. Most spiritually awake people pride themselves on self-sufficiency. They've transcended neediness, but they've also isolated themselves in their independence. Healthy interdependence means being able to ask for help without shame. So practice it. Ask for something small. Let someone show up for you. Let yourself receive. And notice how uncomfortable it is. Notice the part of you that wants to immediately give something back to even the score. Don't, just receive. Just let yourself be helped. That's the practice. Day 17. Stay in a difficult conversation. Find someone you've been avoiding a real talk with. Maybe there's tension you've been spiritually bypassing. Maybe they want more from you than you've been giving. Maybe you've hurt them and haven't addressed it. Whatever it is, initiate the conversation. And here's the key. Don't use spiritual language to create distance. Don't talk about projections or triggers or different paths. Use feeling words. I feel, I need, I'm scared, I'm sorry. Stay in the messiness of it. Let there be awkwardness. Let there be emotion. Don't try to resolve it cleanly. Just stay present to the discomfort without escaping into consciousness talk. This is the practice you'll need in romantic relationship. The ability to stay when it's hard. To be with conflict without transcending it. To work through it at the human level. Day 18. Reach out to an ex or a past connection where things didn't end well. Not to rekindle anything. Not to prove you're evolved. Just to take responsibility for your part. Day 20. Go on a date with no agenda. If you're already dating, skip this. If not, set up a coffee or walk with someone new. But here's the practice. Don't evaluate them. Don't scan for consciousness. Don't check them against your criteria. Just be with them. Be curious about who they are. Ask them questions. Listen to their answers. Laugh if something's funny. Share something real about yourself if it feels natural, but don't turn it into a spiritual compatibility assessment. This is practice in just being human with another human. In allowing connection to happen organically instead of through your filters. You might not be attracted to them romantically. That's fine. The practice isn't about finding a partner in one day. It's about showing up openly, about being available for whatever connection wants to happen instead of controlling it with your requirements. Day 21. End the week by writing what you've learned. Not insights about consciousness. Observations about yourself. What patterns did you notice this week? What was uncomfortable? What did you want to avoid? What surprised you? Write it without spiritual language. Write it like you're talking to a friend who knows nothing about awakening. Just human truth. Real observations. And be honest about what's still hard. About where you're still resistant. about what you're still using your spiritual practice to avoid. This honesty is your foundation. You can't change what you won't acknowledge, so acknowledge it all. The growth and the resistance, the opening and the fear, the willingness and the walls. Write it all down and see where you actually are. Week 4 is about relapse prevention, because here's what's going to happen. You're going to do this work. You're going to open up. You're going to start connecting more vulnerably, and then you're going to get scared. Something will trigger your old patterns. Someone will get close and your nervous system will panic, and your first instinct will be to go back to what kept you safe. Back to your spiritual concepts. Back to the observer position. Back to the belief that you just need someone more conscious. And if you don't have a plan for that moment, you'll relapse. You'll close back down. You'll convince yourself that the work wasn't right for you, that you really do need to wait for a more aligned partner, that your loneliness is noble rather than self-protective. So this week is about building the plan for when that happens. Day 22. Identify your relapse triggers. Make a list of the situations that will make you want to retreat back into spiritual isolation. For most people, it's rejection. Someone doesn't text back or ends things or isn't interested, and the old story comes back. I'm too conscious for most people. I need someone more evolved. Write down your specific triggers. Is it when someone needs too much? When someone is emotionally messy? When someone has opinions you judge as unconscious? When someone doesn't match your sexual preferences? When someone seems interested but not interested enough? Get specific, because these are the moments when you'll want to bail. These are the moments when your nervous system will tell you it's safer to be alone, and you need to know what they are so you can see them coming. Day 23. Create your relapse prevention protocol. For each trigger you identified, write down what you'll do instead of closing down. Make it specific. When I feel rejected, I will call my friend Sarah and tell her I'm in my pattern. When someone needs reassurance and I want to judge them as needy, I will pause and feel my own need that I've been suppressing. When I want to dismiss someone as unconscious, I will ask myself what quality in them I'm afraid of in myself. Make these protocols detailed. Make them actionable. Because in the moment of trigger, you won't be able to think clearly. You'll need these predetermined responses to interrupt the pattern. Write them down. Put them somewhere you can access easily. Make them your emergency kit for when the old patterns try to take over. Day 24. Build your support team. You can't do this work alone. You need people who will call you on your patterns, not other spiritually awake people who will enable your bypassing. People who love you enough to be honest with you. A therapist who understands attachment. A friend who's in a healthy relationship. Someone from your past who knew you before you were on the spiritual path. Tell them what you're working on. Give them permission to point out when you're using spiritual language to avoid. When you're being superior. When you're protecting yourself with consciousness. You need mirrors. You need people who won't let you hide in your awakening. Identify these people. Reach out to them. Tell them explicitly that you're doing this work and you need their honesty. And then actually listen when they give it to you instead of explaining why they don't understand. Day 25. Practice repair. Think about a relationship that ended because of your pattern. Could be romantic, could be friendship, someone you pulled away from or dismissed or ended things with using spiritual language. And practice what you would say if you could repair it. Write it out like a letter even if you're never going to send it. Take full responsibility. Don't blame them. Don't make it about incompatibility. Just own your part. I was scared of how much I was starting to care. I used my spiritual practice as an excuse to avoid working through conflict with you. I convinced myself you weren't conscious enough when really I was terrified of being that vulnerable. Write it all. Feel what it's like to take responsibility without spiritual justification. This is practice for future relationships. Because you will hurt people, you will make mistakes, and you need to know how to repair without hiding behind your awakening. Day 26. Do a sober inventory of your life. Look at what your spiritual practice has actually given you, not the insights or the peak experiences. The life results. Are you happy? Are you connected? Do you have people who know you and love you? Do you have intimate relationships that nourish you? Are you isolated? Are you lonely? Are you using your consciousness as compensation for what's missing in your actual human life? Write this down with brutal honesty. Because spiritual practice should make your life better. If it's not, if you're more isolated now than before you started, something's wrong. And the wrongness isn't that you need more practice. The wrongness is that you've been using practice to avoid life. So look at your life. Really look at it. And ask yourself if this is what you want. If the answer is no, that's good. That's the beginning of real change. Day 27. Make a commitment, not to finding a partner, to being available for partnership. Write down what that means for you. Probably it means staying open even when you're scared. Probably it means not dismissing people as unconscious. Probably it means working with your triggers instead of using them as reasons to leave. Probably it means prioritizing connection over comfort. Probably it means choosing vulnerability over safety. Write down your specific commitment. Make it behavioral, not, I commit to being more conscious in relationship, but I commit to staying in difficult conversations instead of spiritually bypassing them. I commit to saying yes to dates even when the person doesn't meet all my criteria. I commit to going to therapy to work on my attachment wounds. Make it concrete. Make it measurable. Make it something you can actually do and know whether you've done it. This commitment is your North Star for the work ahead. Day 28. Celebrate the work you've done. This is not a small thing. You've spent 4 weeks looking at patterns you've been avoiding for years. You've felt feelings you've been transcending. You've questioned beliefs you've built your identity around. That takes courage. So acknowledge yourself, not your consciousness, your willingness, your humility, your courage to look at yourself honestly. Write down what you're proud of, what's been hard, what you've learned, what's shifted, and let yourself feel good about showing up for this work, because most people won't do it. Most spiritually awake people will stay in their loneliness and call it enlightenment. You're choosing something different. You're choosing integration. You're choosing to be both conscious and connected. And that's worth celebrating. Now let's talk about the long game. Because 4 weeks of practice is just the beginning. These patterns have been running for years or decades. They're not going to permanently shift in a month. You'll have backslides. You'll have moments where you close down again, where you judge someone as unconscious, where you retreat to your meditation cushion and convince yourself you don't need anyone. And that's fine. That's normal. The work isn't about being perfect. It's about noticing faster, about catching yourself in the pattern sooner, about being able to choose differently more often. And over time, over months and years of choosing differently, the pattern actually changes. The nervous system learns that connection is safe. That vulnerability doesn't mean destruction. That you can be awake and in love. Both. Always both. Here's what the maintenance practice looks like. Every day you do some form of embodiment, movement, sensation, something that gets you out of the observer position. This keeps you available for physical intimacy. Every week you do something that challenges your relational patterns. Maybe it's staying in a difficult conversation. Maybe it's asking for help. Maybe it's being emotionally expressive in a way that feels vulnerable. This keeps you practicing the skills of intimacy instead of letting them atrophy. Every month you check in with your support team. And when you do enter relationship, which you will if you keep doing this work and stay open, you bring all of this into it. You notice when you're pulling away and you say it out loud. I'm feeling scared right now and my pattern is to create distance. Can you just be with me while I feel this? You notice when you're judging your partner as unconscious and you turn it around. What am I avoiding in myself by focusing on their flaws? You notice when you're escaping into spiritual concepts and you come back to human language. Instead of, this is triggering my attachment wound and I'm observing my reaction, you say, I feel hurt and I need reassurance. Simple, direct, human, and here's what becomes possible. Relationships that last. Not because they're perfect, not because you found someone who's enlightened, but because you've done the work to be someone who can sustain intimacy, someone who doesn't use consciousness as armor, someone who can be triggered and stay, someone who can be vulnerable without being destroyed, someone who wants freely and loves fully and remains grounded whether the relationship works out or not. This is the integration. This is what it looks like when awakening serves life instead of protecting you from it. There will be hard moments. Moments when your partner doesn't understand your spiritual experiences and you feel isolated again. Moments when they need something from you and every cell in your body wants to retreat. Moments when their unconscious patterns trigger yours and you want to leave. In those moments, you have a choice. You can go back to the old story. This person isn't conscious enough. This isn't aligned. I need someone more awakened. Or you can stay and do the work. Feel the trigger. Work with it. Communicate about it. Repair when you cause harm. Be humble about your own unconsciousness. Remember that you're human and messy and still learning, just like they are. The choice you make in those moments determines everything. Choose to stay more often than you leave. Choose to work with your patterns more often than you escape them. Choose vulnerability more often than protection. And slowly, over time, relationship becomes possible. Not just possible, beautiful, rich, deep. The kind of intimacy you've been longing for but thought was incompatible with your awakening. It's not. It never was. The only thing incompatible with intimacy was your use of awakening as armor. And you're dismantling that now, piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. So here's my final invitation. Stop waiting for a partner who's conscious enough. Stop requiring that someone be enlightened before they're worthy of your love. Stop using your spiritual standards as protection from vulnerability. Just be open. Be available. Be honest about your loneliness and your longing. Let yourself want connection without immediately transcending the want. Go on dates with ordinary people. Have conversations with regular humans. Look for kindness and humor and warmth instead of consciousness and awakening and non-dual understanding. See what happens when you stop filtering everyone through your spiritual requirements. See who shows up when you're actually available instead of performatively open but secretly closed. And when someone does show up, when you feel that pull of attraction and connection and possibility, don't run. Don't immediately start scanning for their level of consciousness. Don't evaluate whether they've done enough work. Don't check them against your criteria. Just be with them. Let yourself enjoy them. Let yourself want them. Let yourself imagine a life with them. And when your patterns arise, because they will, do the work. Feel the fear. Stay in your body. Communicate vulnerably. Repair when you mess up. Choose the relationship over your comfort. Choose connection over consciousness. Choose love over loneliness. This is the path, not the one that leads away from relationship into solitary enlightenment, and not the one that leads back to unconscious enmeshment, but the one that integrates both, that honors your awakening and your humanity, that lets you be spacious awareness and also a person who loves and needs and wants and occasionally falls apart. That makes room for all of you, the infinite and the intimate, the absolute and the anxious, the realized and the still figuring it out. You don't have to choose. You never did. The choice was always a false one, created by incomplete realization and protected by spiritual concepts. But now you know. Now you've seen the trap. Now you've felt the cost of staying in it. And now you have the practices to find your way out, to become someone who can hold paradox, who can be enlightened and emotionally messy, who can see through the illusion of separation and still feel the electricity of desire, who can rest as pure awareness and also text someone they miss them. This is freedom. Not freedom from relationship, freedom in relationship. Freedom to love without grasping, to connect without losing yourself, to be vulnerable without being destroyed, to want someone fully and be okay if they leave, to give everything and know you'll survive if it ends. This is what your spiritual practice has been preparing you for. Not escape, integration, not transcendence, wholeness, not loneliness disguised as enlightenment, but love that includes your awakening and is made richer by it. So go, do the work, feel the feelings, have the conversations, take the risks, open your heart, let someone in, let yourself be seen, let yourself be loved, not as pure consciousness, as a human being who happens to be awake, as someone who's touched the infinite and still wants to hold someone's hand, as someone who knows they're everyone and everything and still chooses one person to build a life with. This is possible. You can have it, both of it, all of it. The vast spacious awareness and the intimate personal love. They're not opposed. They're the same thing expressing itself in different octaves. And when you finally get that, when you finally live that, you're free. Free to be alone without suffering. And free to be together without fear. Free to love without limit. Free to lose without breaking. Free to be the consciousness you are and the human you'll always be. Both. Always both. Forever both. And in that integration, you finally, beautifully, terrifyingly come home.